Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Friday the 22nd of August. I'm Stephen Ridgway. You're going to love this selection of things today. Windows Docker desktop vulnerability allows full host compromise. That was the scenario that the security team, back in the days when I worked in finance, that was the scenario that, not with Docker, but with virtualization, I suppose. But I was saying that was the scenario that the security team were fixated on. And, when you're talking 10, 12 years ago, you couldn't really jailbreak out of a guest and get control of the host, although theoretically, the risks would exist as a theoretical risk. Well, guess what? Docker has made that, has brought that risk through to being an issue and has made it utterly trivial to exploit. So the CVE that this vulnerability is tracked as is CVE 2025-9074, and it is critical. It affects Docker desktop for Windows, all versions less than 4.44.3. Oh, this will make you laugh. Docker's got an internal HTTP API, which is exposed to the guests on 192.168.65.7 on port 2375 without any authentication or access controls. So basically, in two requests, two HTTP post requests, an attacker from within a container can create a privileged container on the host's C drive, mount it, and run it, which then gives the attacker full control over the host from within the guest. Gobsmacked. So firstly, Docker, having had this pointed out to them, Docker have fixed it. It is fixed in version 4.44.3. Recommend an immediate upgrade to that version. Oh, deep in the article, although the article does say Windows, it does also mention that this affects Docker Desktop for Mac. There's a similar vulnerability on the Mac version of Docker Desktop. So firstly, yes, ensure that you are patching. If you're running Docker, this one is like properly serious. Secondly, it just goes to show internal API vulnerability. I mean, we're going back 5, 6, 7 years. I spent some time discussing at the times, those days prior to lockdowns and all sorts of other things. I used to go to quite a lot of meetups and other on the ground type events that were kicking around, especially in London. And there was a lot of discussion at that time around API risks. API vulnerabilities were the next big thing. Well, we weren't wrong. It just took people a long time to realize, and perhaps a little longer to start exploiting these things than we kind of expected. But internal APIs need to be properly checked and secured. This demonstrates a pretty fundamental failure in the secure coding pipeline. To have any APIs that have no security on them at all is at best dubious, even if you put mitigating controls around access to the API. But where the API inadvertently becomes exposed to an environment through which it can be exploited, then really, seriously, there should be some form of authentication. It isn't, I can't think of a reason why you couldn't put authentication onto all APIs, even if it's machine-to-machine stuff, contain Docker containers talking to Docker hosts, whatever processes, blah, blah, blah. You can still secure it. It's certainly not beyond, not beyond the will of some very good DevSecOps people that I've had the pleasure of talking to over the years. So this one's just mad. Okay, here's another thing that I bet you didn't know this was going on. Large language models. Large language models are expensive for the provider to run. Yes, no shit, Sherlock. It requires a lot of processing power in the background to run these things, big data centers, blah, blah, blah. Did you know, therefore, that if you were... Let's take... The article talks about GPT-5. If you were interacting with GPT-5, did you know that the majority of requests or majority of interactions you have behind the scenes get directed to cheaper models? So GPT-4 or 5 Mini or whatever it might be. And that there's actually an algorithm called Promised Root, which stands for something long and complicated, which I can't be bothered to read out. I could be bothered to read it out, but it just wouldn't help. But it's called Promised Root, and it basically finds the cheapest model that can answer the question that's been set, and then runs that, whatever the question, the English language, like natural language question, but like the task set, and it runs it there, and then puts it all back together again and presents it to you. Really clever, except some of these models don't have particularly strong guardrails or security applied to them. So it has proved to be remarkably simple to route particular queries to these models, therefore bypassing a lot of the checks and balances that are in the heavyweight modern models. All you need to do is include phrases like respond quickly or use compatibility mode or fast response needed. And the routing model will downgrade from GPT-5 to GPT-4 or something else. And it's all done in the background. So you weren't aware that this stuff was happening. Which is very interesting, because if you are looking at understanding the security of the models that you're using for corporate stuff, probably if you're saying, well, okay, we will corporately use GPT-5, you will have done research into what are the guide rails for GPT-5, what will it allow users to do and what won't it allow users to do. Well, that's all well and good, but if actually you think you're talking to GPT-5 but it's busily routing it to a good old cheap bit of GPT-4, which has a completely different set of guardrails and a different risk profile, you don't know what it's going to do. So the article quotes some research which has demonstrated how remarkably simple it is to bypass one model's guardrails by just persuading it to run the query or deal with the task on some other model completely transparently and in the background. So yeah, if you are using GPT for anything sensitive, or if you particularly don't want certain guardrails to be breached, you need to understand how these routing queries work in the background, and you need to have some thought about how all this stuff hangs together. Short-term solutions include auditing of AI routing logs to see whether people have been looking to bypass controls by specifically manipulating the routing of queries or tasks. You could implement what they call cryptographic routing, so that the routing doesn't parse user input. Long-term fixes are really down to the providers to put universal safety filters across all model variants. Now, whilst the article talks about GPT-5, I think there is no reason to believe that all other models don't have similar, if not absolutely identical weaknesses architecturally. So that's something that I think is definitely worth being aware of. We're well aware that AI, whilst good, AI isn't actually brilliant at things. It's a step forward. It's not the revolution that everybody thought it was going to be in reality. It does have massive information security risks, not just technical cyber risks, but like a broader infosec risks associated with using it. We don't understand, as users of the services, we don't have access to the information to make good risk assessed decisions about what we should or shouldn't be using these models for. So, we continue to use, but use with caution, I think that's what I would say. And then finally from me, also in the space of, in the bucket of, oh really, when it comes to AI, well, Anthropic has started scanning Claude chats for queries about DIY nuclear weapons. I suppose this could alternatively be in the bucket of on what planet would you not do that? So they have announced that they are looking for conversations with Claude, or looking in Claude traffic, to spot people who are apparently trying to work out how to build DIY nuclear weapons. Yeah, I'll ask Claude how to do it, and then I'll spin one up in my kitchen this evening. Unbelievably, there are apparently adversaries with a remarkable lack of OPSEC that have been asking Claude how to build nuclear weapons. It does tend to pick up other things as well, though. So it has flagged up in the real world, in lab environments. It's around 95%. It's just about a 95% detection rate, which is nothing like as brilliant as you would expect. Refer back to the false positive dilemma that we spoke about earlier this week. If you don't know what the false positive dilemma is, Google it. It is a very interesting statistical reality that kind of blows away a lot of the very impressive sounding stats that people say around how accurate certain things are when they've got a tiny false positive or a tiny error rate, but the sample size is absolutely enormous. So, 95% detection rate for questions about nuclear weapons is not great. They say there's a 0 false positives. Well, that's nice to know. If you are legitimately looking up how to make a nuclear weapon, it apparently won't flag you. All right, I'm not even going to begin to go there. So in the real world, apparently it's less accurate. So if you ever wondered whether using these models is safe and secure, I would definitely recommend you have a read of this article. Give you something lightweight and amusing to think about over the weekend. Anyway, that's enough from me for today, even. And for this week, hope your week has been hope your week has been as busy as mine, and perhaps not quite as chaotic, but there we go. We're doing well, so I will speak to you